We're really happy to be here and to present this webinar with you today. My name is Kristen Vincent. I'm the Director of Marketing for the Center for Responsive Schools. I'm a former fourth grade teacher, and I've been working at CRS for about 15 years in various roles, including as a responsive classroom consulting teacher and a program developer. And I am joined with my colleague, Jane. So I'm going to have her introduce herself as well.
Thanks, Kristen. Hi, everyone. I'm Jane Kofi. I am the Director of Curriculum Instruction in the Programs Department for Responsive Classroom at the Center for Responsive Schools. I am coming to you from my home in Virginia. Prior to joining the Center for Responsive Schools full-time, I did do some consulting with them part-time, but I also was in the classroom. I taught everything from pre-K through fifth grade and some combinations of things for 20 years, mostly in Fairfax County. And so I'm excited to be able to spend some time just sharing some information with you today. Thanks, Kristen.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. Thanks for being here. We want to share just a little bit about the Center for Responsive Schools and the programs that we have to offer. And we thought it would be much more interesting to watch just a short video that we have to share with you. And so Emily is going to get that up for us. But Center for Responsive Schools has professional development for teachers in our responsive classroom approach to teaching and learning. We have a social and emotional learning curriculum called Fly 5. And we publish books and resources for educators under our brand CRS Publishing. So we're going to share that video with you.
Center for Responsive Schools is celebrating 40 years. Since 1981, CRS has been transforming schools into optimal learning environments for educators and students alike through academic, social, and emotional learning programs, products, and services. We offer a comprehensive SEL solution with our 3 brands: Responsive Classroom, Fly 5, and CRS Publishing. Let's take a quick look at each of these. Responsive Classroom is a student-centered approach to teaching and discipline. Our innovative program, which integrates academic and social-emotional learning, is used by educators around the world. Fly 5 is a K-8 standards-based curriculum focused exclusively on teaching social, emotional, and behavioral skills. This helps set students up for success both in and out of school and beyond. CRS Publishing creates inspiring and relevant books that empower excellence in teaching and leadership. At Center for Responsive Schools, we're bringing hope and joy to educators and students in every school, every day. Visit us now at crslearn.org to discover how we can support your school and community.
All right, thank you, Emily, for playing that short video. So that's a little bit about us and what we do at Center for Responsive Schools. And we just like to share the goals of the webinar that Jane and I have planned for you today. We are hoping to just share about the importance of helping parents feel welcome and why that's really so crucial to the education of all of our students and making sure that parents feel welcome and included. We will share some strategies for establishing that positive relationship with parents and strengthening connections with parents through parent involvement in the classroom. And we also want to examine just the unique opportunities that a diverse and culturally plural classroom can provide for not just our students, but our families as well, and really help enrich the classroom community and the school community as a whole. We also want to share a quick note about the use of the word parents during this webinar. So I'm going to have Jane come on, and this is Jane's book that she wrote, and this is where the information from this webinar is coming from. So I'm going to have Jane share a little bit about the use of the word parents.
Thanks, Kristen. So you'll probably notice or know that usually sometimes you hear the word parent and immediately we think about, well, there's so many adults in students' lives that fill the role or support students in that same way. And so when we think about that, that could be a grandparent, that could be an aunt, an uncle, it could be almost anyone. And so when we think about that piece, there are so many different roles that adults have. And so just for ease and being able to share information with you, we use the word parent, which is something that's familiar to many, but knowing that it also is a word that we want to also keep in mind that it encompasses all caregivers. So you might hear us use the word families, you might hear us use the word parents, but it is intended to speak to all caregivers and adults who support students and them being successful and caring for them.
Thank you, Jane. And Jane did author this book called Strengthening the Parent-Teacher Partnership, which is published by Center for Responsive Schools. And everything that we're sharing tonight comes from this book. So you can, if you visit the website that is there, you'll find information about purchasing the book, and we also have free discussion questions that you can download that accompany the book. So if you want to do a book study or just explore the book on your own with a guide, we have that there for everyone. So, all right, so we're going to dig into some questions. I have some questions for you, Jane. First, I would love for you to share with everyone just what was your motivation in writing this book?
It's a great question, Kristen. It's kind of maybe a little bit selfish, maybe, because for me, it was an opportunity to grow in an area that I always wanted to dive deeper into. Working with families was something that I always focused on and wanted to grow more in, but then finding ways to connect with families just in so many different grade levels and in different teaching situations, making families just as important as the students who are in the classrooms. And being able to work on the book allowed me to dig a little bit deeper, but then also for the educators who choose to read the book or just like peruse the book, it also hopefully it confirms some things for educators, but then also it's also affirming, like, I'm doing this, and so what else can I do? And then allowing for other educators to have the opportunity to continue to grow in that area too. That was kind of me wanting to grow, but then also at the same time supporting educators who also want to grow in that area.
And you're a parent as well. So it's sort of like both sides of it, right? So as a parent, taking on that role with your daughter and going into schools and meeting teachers, I'm sure that provided also a lens in which to share in the book.
Yes, and it's kind of funny because when I'm in a school building with my child, I'm immediately thinking about, well, I wonder if the teachers do this, or I wonder if the educators do this. And then I also then think, wait, did I do that? Did I make sure that I did this also? So it's also an opportunity for me to continue to think about that from both perspectives, as a parent and also as an educator.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I was thinking about that too. When I first read your book, I was thinking about it both sides, like as a parent and as a teacher from the classroom. Mm-hmm. So we know that, educators and school leaders, we're always working to create environments in our classrooms where students feel welcome, they feel a sense of belonging, and we work really hard at this. And so I was thinking about applying that to the families and parents as well. And so what are some ways that we can make parents feel or help them feel a sense of belonging in our schools and apply that to families as well?
Yeah, I feel like many people have heard this before, is to reach out like soon and early, and to reach out consistently. And I was going to say often, but it's not so much as giving families, because I'm sure you've probably been there as well as a parent, where you get a whole lot of things from the school and it's so much communication that it's almost overwhelming, and then you end up not looking at all of it because there's so much of it. So it's not so much as often, but regularly, and making sure that it's meaningful and that it's happening early. I know for me, with my child in middle school, it's kind of tricky because there's so many different teachers, but I know one classroom teacher sent out an email to all families before the school year started, and it automatically gives this feeling of, okay, you want to make sure that I know what's happening in the classroom, because I think and maybe not with all families and not with all educators, when children are younger, it's almost as though you get so much communication or correspondence from the school, and so you know what's happening. And then as they get older, it seems to me that it starts to fade a little bit, but the thing is, I still want to know, still want to know what's happening, especially when they go from elementary school to middle school and middle school to high school. I feel like I more so want to know what else is happening. And so getting correspondence or some kind of communication early on lets me know and lets families know that they matter, and that you want them to be with you on that journey. It's not just this is happening in our building and in our school, but not just those pieces like big events, but the day-to-day, that part matters too. Because I'm not in the classroom, I can't see what she's learning in Latin or what she's learning in math, but I would like to know. It allows for families, it opens up the door so families can support their children in some way. And yes, there are going to be stuff like, I do not know Latin, so I'm not going to be able to break it down, but I can then reach out to the teacher and ask about resources if there's an area where she needs more support, and then I'm able to do that. I think being able to create an environment where families feel like that sense of belonging starts with just that first initial correspondence and letting them know that they can be a part of the school year, and then continually doing that.
Yeah, that's an important point, because we do think about a lot of communication coming when children are little and they're just starting school. They're not going to come home and share all the intricacies of what they're learning in school, and they're really just going to share about recess and snack. And as a parent, you kind of want to know a little bit more than that. And so there's a lot of, communication from elementary schools, and as kids move through the grades, there's less and less, or sometimes it'll be coming just from the principal,
Right.
but not really the individual teachers. And you really make a great point about that's still really important. And I can see that with my daughter, in high school, they're teaching the student to take responsibility for asking the parents to sign this, or to, communicate about that. But even if it was just an email once a month that just said, here's some of the things we've been doing, or here, hear how wonderful your students are, and, that kind of thing. It would go a long way to build that bridge, because we're not invited in the schools in the older grades.
I know, not for, maybe for events, but not necessarily for, here's what we're doing right now in algebra, and we want you to see this new strategy we're using, or that students are learning. That doesn't always happen.
Yeah, and school is different. School is different. Like, school is different than when we were in high school, we were in middle school, we were in elementary school, and we want to think about it as the same, but it's different.
It is, and families appreciate knowing some of those nuances, that when students come home and share something, even different digital platforms that students are using. When my child came home and she was like, we're using this, and I'm like, wait, but last year and I needed to know, like, how does this work? How is this different from the previous platform that she used in elementary school, so that I can actually be supportive in helping navigate it as well. And I think the other piece to that is, when students first enter like kindergarten, there's so much communication that happens, because it's the first time students are in school. And so families get a lot of opportunities to know more about how school works. And I think the same should be, and if it's not true, for middle school and high school, because those are first too. And even though those children are older, those are still going to be first for some parents, like the first time their child is in middle school, and the first time their child is in high school. And even though, like you said, Kristen, when we were in school, it looked a certain way, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to look that way for those children at that time.
Yeah, so important. And one of the questions that was submitted ahead of time was, how can a teacher build trust from parents? And that's laying the foundation right there, so that because sometimes in the older grades, we really only hear from the school when there's a problem, versus hearing from the school just to share the news of what's going on, or a focus for the month, or something that, as a community, the school is working on or working towards. So that definitely can help build that trust there. And I think too, something about that consistent communication, that when the parent has a concern, then it's
Mhm.
not the first time you're hearing from them or they're hearing from you. And so we had a few people ask us around navigating tricky questions from parents, or if parents have a concern and they come to you about the curriculum saying, I don't want my, student learning this, or I want my child to be learning more. Like they're
Mhm.
in an algebra class, but I want them learning geometry, or I want them, or I don't want them to be taught the traditional algorithm. I want them to be taught, all these alternative ways of solving problems. And so can you just speak a little bit to that when you hear from parents who have
Right.
concerns?
I think sometimes, and I will speak for myself, like as an educator, sometimes when one gets any type of communication from a family, it's you, at least I know I was like, oh my goodness, what did I do? Or what are they asking? And sometimes when that happens, the immediate response is almost like get defensive. And so as an educator, we have the power to de-escalate or escalate a situation. So if a family reaches out and there's something that they're concerned about, whether it's they want more something or they want less of something or they don't want something, to first hear and listen to what they're sharing, being able to hear where they're coming from. And sometimes, and at least I've found in my experience, when I stop and just listen, if a family is escalated and they start to talk, if I'm just listening and I'm hearing and I understand that you would want this way, I can hear why, and I can understand why that might be challenging for you, especially if this is something that is really a concern for you and something that your family really wants to see happen or not happen. The tone or the climate in the room or in that situation changes, from, oh, okay, I thought you were going to push back, but actually you're hearing me and you're listening to what I say. And that also allows for you, as families are sharing, to hear not just the perspective, but then also maybe the why behind it, which sometimes doesn't come out when things escalate and you don't get to hear the why. It can be for any number of reasons, but recognizing that families want what's best for their children. That is something to always keep in mind when families do come to you with a situation where there's something that's tricky about what they're asking for. Either it's I don't want this, or I do want this, or I want none of this. That they want what's best for their children and they're doing what they feel is best for their children. And so therefore, if you listen with that, also that lens in mind, or are listening with that in mind, it also helps to hear where they're coming from and then to be able to make a decision based on that. So I hear you and I can see why, that let's try this thing, or here's what we usually do, or it's taught usually in this way. And if you feel strongly that your child should not learn it in this way, here's what I can do. And also being honest about, I'm not able to do this, but I can do this. And being upfront about what you're able to offer and what you can't offer. There are many things over the years that are, what's a good way of saying it? That tend to be at the forefront of families' minds for whatever reason. And when those situations come up, it's better to hear where families are coming from, before we jump to a solution like, well, this is what I'm doing, or this is what I'm not doing. This is what I'm able to do, and finding out what families also want to hear in return. And if there's something you can't do, being honest about it, but in a way that lets them know that I still hear you. I am not able to do that. And if I were, here's some things that I could do. Here's some things I'm able to do, so that they know that they're heard in that way too.
And I think also listening, like you said, you can understand the why behind it. And maybe it's coming from a place of misunderstanding, that they thought X, Y, and Z was going to happen in your classroom and it's not happening. And why, why did they have that misunderstanding? Or a past experience with an older child going through the system, and now you're the new teacher and, it's different. And they're expecting the past experiences to be there today. And it's just, gently bringing them along to whatever's changed. And I think too, pointing them into the direction of resources, or, I'm not able to do this, but let's approach the principal and maybe there's something we can do, or letting them know that they may come to you thinking they're the only ones with this concern. And you can reassure them that no, plenty of parents have this concern, like plenty of parents of middle schoolers or parents of high schoolers have this concern, just like we would say to a fourth grader. Lots of fourth graders worry about this.
Exactly.
It's normal for a parent to have this concern or to worry about this. Normalize it for them. And then say, and here's what we do in our school community or in our classroom to address it or to help, or here are your options. And I think so important to understand we do have that power to escalate or de-escalate. And what do we do with students in the classroom? We provide them options.
Right.
That's the best
Right.
way to put the power, back into their hands and to share the responsibility. So we can take what we know about students and use it with parents as well.
Right. And you said something, Christina, which made me think about, and if you don't have the answer, it's okay to say, let me look into that, and then be clear about when you're going to get back to families, because that does matter too. So if you say something like, let me look into that, I can get back to you next week with some resources or an answer to your question or solution, or we can problem solve, or we can go through these resources together, being able to give them, I hear you, and I'm also going to follow up, and then making sure to follow up.
Really important.
Mm-hmm.
So as educators, we know it's really important to get to know our students well. We try to know them individually, culturally, developmentally, and we try to honor and acknowledge everything that makes each child unique. And we also know that for meaningful learning to take place, students need to see themselves represented in the classroom. And so I imagine that that's the same for parents and families as well, that we have a diverse classroom, and that means that our families and parents come from diverse backgrounds. And so can you share a little bit about the importance of honoring that, not just for our students, but for their whole family?
Yeah, absolutely. The school where I taught the longest was a really diverse school. There were over 30 languages spoken. And so I know our school worked really hard to think about how to support all the different families with all the different unique backgrounds, and being able to make sure that all families feel seen in the school community. So just like we would do with our students, and making sure they feel like seen and they feel that sense of belonging in the community, doing the same for families. And it doesn't mean being an expert in every single different culture that there is, but it does mean being curious and learning from families when they share information with you, whether it's something as small as, we only do these things, I'm making this up, we only do these things during the afternoons. And so now you're aware of it, and knowing that this happens in the afternoons, I'm not going to put really important meetings at that time, because then I'm excluding part of the community for our school when I do things like that. So being mindful of pieces like that, but then also, inviting families to share some things that you may not be aware of. And sometimes that can be tricky, because you want to make sure you're asking the questions in a way that honors different and unique backgrounds, and also allows for you to find out more about all of the different families that make up the students that make up your classroom community. And so doing that in a way, if you don't know, just saying, I'm not familiar, can you tell me a little bit more about what this might be like? Or can you share a little bit more about how your family may approach this particular situation? Or even sometimes it's learning. This is the way that we approach learning in our family, in our home, or just this is the way we do this particular thing here. And being able to hear that information, but then also apply it. I think sometimes we get some information from families or from our school community and all the unique pieces that make that up, and then maybe not remembering to apply it. and knowing like, okay, so I know this about this family, or I know this about these families, so that they feel included. I think that's really important when there's so many different cultures represented at your school, that you're working constantly. And when I say constantly, let me rephrase that. It is something that you're always doing when you think about events, when you think about opportunities for families to be present in the building, that you're always considering all the different cultures that make up the school community. And if there's a moment where you miss something, then fixing it, because we're human and we're going to make mistakes. And so if there's a moment or a situation where there was something that you realized, oh goodness, we weren't thinking about these families, we really needed to have translators available during this situation. So let's plan ahead for next time, and let's be proactive and do things differently, and being able to then go back and solve some of those situations and fix some of those situations that may have like been just maybe an oversight, or just didn't notice that, being able to address those.
Yeah, that's really important. And I think I've seen some communities that are growing very quickly, not just in terms of like the number of kids and people living in town and coming to their schools, but the types of people coming have more diverse backgrounds. And so that change can be hard when you always have this third grade play and you've always done it at 10 a.m. on the last week of school. And, you know, that may have worked 10, 15 years ago, but with how quickly your town has grown, transportation might not be the same, access to coming to an event during the school day might not be the same. And so thinking about constantly evaluating past practices and current practices to see what can I do to make sure that everyone can be included. So thinking about transportation, time of day, childcare can be a barrier for some families. So can we just provide childcare during this event so the little siblings can come and then the families can enjoy whatever's happening for their older students? Just constantly evaluating that.
Right.
And I think you made an important point about we can't be an expert in every culture and every language and, you know, translate everything into all the different, you know, languages that are spoken. But if we can try to every year maybe add a new language to what we're translating, or add a new form that is translated in another language, or add an interpreter every year, you'll just be growing this bank of resources that will help everyone feel included.
Right. You know, Krista, you say that, and I'm thinking like of a completely different experience, but sometimes if you go to an airport that's not like, that's outside of the country, and that can feel daunting sometimes to try to navigate that, but how that sense of comfort sometimes when I just see a picture, I'm like, oh, those are to the restrooms. I know that photo, I know that's to the restrooms, and how I feel like, oh, that was made for me because I can't read this particular language, but I can see that this is going to support me to get to this particular spot. It seems so small, but some of those subtle things help to let families know, like, I'm including you in any way that I can, and that matters. It does.
Yeah. I think you and I were also talking about, you know, when those parent group meetings happen in school, and are they during the day? Are they at night? There's pros and cons to both. And, you know, holding conferences, there's going to be barriers for people to be able to come. But as long as you are reaching out and problem solving and trying to say, you know what, bring the grandparents with you, or bring the little kids and they can play in the corner of the room, or if it's better to join on technology, we can do a Zoom call, and you know, then you don't have to worry about your transportation or childcare, and we can do it that way instead. So I think it's like being flexible, or it might be going to where everyone is. So maybe once a month, the parent group meeting is actually at the apartment complex on the other side of the highway where a lot of families live. So going to families instead of expecting families to come to you.
Right.
Really important. Yeah. And then we also know that a lot of strengthening those family connections happens through parent involvement in the school and in the classroom.
Mhm.
And COVID really put the brakes on that for us, especially in the younger grades. We often have parents in to help with reading or, math workshop, or just helping around in the school, maybe delivering things and making copies and stuff like that. Or helping in the school library, and we had to put the brakes on that.
Mhm.
But we might be wanting to get back to that, or we might have learned some things from COVID that we want to also keep. So when you think about that, what comes to mind when we're navigating this sort of new back to school time?
Right. The first thing that comes to mind for me is, you said this earlier, like assessing and reassessing and figuring out this works really well. And this is something we hadn't considered. I was talking to a group of teachers earlier this last week. And one of the things that we talked about was allowing for families to still come into the classroom the way that we had during COVID, where they couldn't be there, but here's another way that you can be here, whether it's Zoom or some other virtual platform that allows families to be in the room. And I say that because I don't know that that was something that I thought about when I was in the classroom. I don't think I went to families' homes. We met in like other locations if that worked better. We met at the school if that worked for them. They brought little ones if they needed to. But I don't think I ever thought to myself, would you like to do this meeting virtually? Would that work better for you? And how something like that came out of during the time of COVID, where families couldn't be in the building and where many people couldn't be in the building, that it actually may have worked better for some families to be able to say, yeah, I can meet you at 2 o'clock and I can still have the kids in the background. I can still be doing what I'm doing, or I can get right back to what I was doing. I mean, even for me, when a teacher's like, we can meet virtually. Yes, that would actually work much better for me, because it's not the time that I need to drive to the school and then factor in I'm driving during traffic and then factor in driving back, where now what would have been a 20-minute meeting is now an hour and 20 minutes for the heading there and back. And I think the ways that we communicate and with families means taking time to also see what worked from this period that was not a great time of year, or a couple years, but allowed for us to be creative and innovative in allowing for families to still be present, even though they physically couldn't be present in the classroom or the school community. Families that may never have gotten an opportunity to read to the class now had the opportunity to do that, or families that wanted to be able to listen in for a back to school night or an open house could do that. But then also even things like recording an open house or a back to school night and being able to watch it when it works for you, that is a valuable thing that I honestly hadn't thought about when back to school nights were things that we did. You just came and it wasn't something that we had thought about, like, hey, maybe we could do a hybrid and have it where people can Zoom in and people can be there. And I think that's kind of a valuable piece to bring along and to continue to do, in addition to all the things that we find do work with the families or the school communities that we have.
Absolutely. And we know that the in-person experiences creates connections that are really hard to replicate over Zoom. So of course we would love to have everyone in person, and you're able to communicate, I think, just that much better, but we can leverage the technology for when that's not possible. And like you said, think about it as a hybrid, sort of like the parent community as like you can think about it as a hybrid mode of communication, that some people might need to Zoom in, some people can come in person, but trying to get the access that way. I know some of the local parent groups here at the schools started doing Facebook Live during their parent meetings in the evenings. And it was great because you could just watch it live. You could type in a question or a comment if you needed to, and then it sat there as a recording. So anyone who wasn't able to watch could just go on the next morning and catch up on the news and the announcements and things that were made. And I think that video is so powerful, because we might have, the back to school night, and we're giving a lot of handouts while we're giving our presentation. But if someone wasn't there live in the classroom to hear the presentation, all they're getting is the written communication.
Yes.
And that can be really, really hard for some families to access, or to even have the time to read through. So having the recording, they could sit and listen, or at least pick up on some of what you're saying, even if English is not their first language. So we definitely, as difficult as COVID was, learned a lot about communicating with parents. And I see a lot of that we want to bring with us as we get back into schools and think about that hybrid environment that we're a part of now. Definitely.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned before, you're the author of Strengthening the Parent-Teacher Partnership book. And I wanted to know, did anything surprise you when you were researching or writing this book?
It's a good question. I think as I was working on it, I noticed there were so many things that I remember from when I was in school that are still like tried and true things that still work. And it's interesting because many, many years later, you would think, oh, now we do it this way. But some of those ways that we reach out to families or connect with families, or even practices like connecting with families early, that's not new. And it wasn't so much as it was surprising as it was more of, this is something that we need to continue to do. And it has been working for years. So it's not something that needed to be changed or needed to be more innovative or anything like that. It was just, it works. And so we should still be doing things like that. And then the other piece that I realized is some of the things, as I was thinking about it when I was an educator versus an educator parent, was, oh yeah, I used to do this. And this was, in my mind, such a great thing to do. And then as a parent, I'm like, no, it's not.
Don't do that.
Great. Please don't do that. Not the best thing to do. And I say that, for example, and that's why I stayed away from saying communicating with families often, but more so being regular and being meaningful with the communication, because in my mind, I was like, I'm going to send something like every other day or every week. And it is great to get communication from your child's teacher, but after a while, it loses its kind of like the meaningfulness behind it, because I'm getting it every single time. Okay, yeah. And then I would put it to the side. And I remember doing that. And then when I saw that, I was like, oh, good grief. I'm getting all the same. It says the same thing as it did last week. I don't need to have it again. And thinking that was the best way to go about being consistent. And it wasn't so much as consistency as it was meaningful consistency. And that was something where, as a educator parent, that I started to see there were things that I had done that I just thought, these are great practices, because I remember that when I was younger, that's what they did. And yes, to an extent, but then being more thoughtful about it through what's going to be more valuable for families than just, here's a whole bunch of this thing that I'm just going to keep sending, and then it's not getting read. And then I wonder why it wasn't getting read. Because it was so frequent, or it was so long what I was sending. And I see that now when I would get papers, and I'm like, this is so long. And now I have to sit down and set aside all this time to read all of this, things like that. It stuck out to me as I was working on the book, was things that I started like, yeah, you should totally do this. And I'm like, but wait a minute, not so much.
Right. And having that perspective as a parent on the receiving end of the communication. And I think about it too, like oftentimes there's communication from the superintendent sometimes there can be communications from the building principal, then you have your classroom teacher, and if your student has more, your child has more than one teacher, you know, maybe they see some special area teachers or special education teachers, you're going to get communication from them. And so just being mindful of that. And you know, we were talking about this, and actually that was one of the questions that came in. How do we learn why families don't engage, or if they're not engaging in surveys, or outreach seems ineffective? And you and I were talking about that question, saying, if you were doing the same thing over and over again with a student and it wasn't effective, you would change it. And so we can't just keep doing the same thing over and over again with parents, right? So if I love technology, but if all we're doing is sending emails, I mean, my inbox at the end of the day is just flooded. And I want to see the stuff from my, you know, my daughter's school, that I want to be flagged and see it. But if there are multiple things every day from the district, or the reminder, or this and that, like you said, it's hard to know what to spend my time on reading.
Right. And even when you say with the emails and being able to, when you're getting a lot of information, making bullet points are very, very powerful. When I can just scan and say, oh,
Yep.
This is relevant for my child or for me or for our family, being able to stop on that rather than reading through paragraphs of information. And I am sure that whomever wrote it thought very carefully and deeply about what they wanted to share and wanted to make sure they got all the information in there. And also recognizing you can do that, but if it's like, and here are the highlights, and now I can scan just the highlights, it's really helpful to be able to do that too. And then I was saying to you, Kristen, earlier that I know it's like a lost art form almost, is like writing letters or postcards, but it is such a powerful thing to get something in the mail that is handwritten. I know sometimes I'll get things from my daughter's school and it's got the print label on it because everyone has to get that particular type of communication. But if there's something, especially for the families, for that question where for some reason you're finding they're not engaging and you're not sure why, I'm pretty sure that might be a smaller number than your entire school community, in which case even reaching out to them through the mail where it is a written addressed letter, the interior of the envelope doesn't have to be written unless you have that time, and that would be powerful in and of itself to do that. But I know when I get mail, when I see something that's handwritten, it's the first one that I go to, because everything else is like sales and a bill. And I'm like, okay, I know what all that is. But then when you see something that's handwritten, you're like, oh, well, what is this? I want to know a little bit more about what this is about. And you may get some one extra person who may not have engaged before, who's now going to engage, because in this correspondence that you sent, it says, here are all the possible ways that you can reach out, what works for you, and then you're able to continue to do that. And I know when it's like a mass volume of individuals, it's tricky. But one thing I did learn was when I'm sending out correspondence to families, I don't have to do it all at the same time. I can do 5 on Monday and 5 on Tuesday and 5, as long as throughout the week everyone is getting something. I don't need to try to send 100 different things on one day. It's more manageable, especially when you have multiple classrooms. So that means multiple families you're reaching out to. It can be, I'm only going to do, my first period is the families that I reached out to on Mondays, and my second period I reach out to them on Wednesdays. It doesn't have to be all of them all at once, if you can help it.
Yeah, that's a great point, just to make it manageable and to kind of break it down that way. And I think also along with that question is don't stop. Like, don't stop communicating.
Yes.
So you can try different things, but keep sending those emails, because maybe in some way the parents have learned that, like in the older grades, their job is just to receive communication, right? We're just going to receive it. We're just going to get it. And thank you very much, but I'm just getting it, and that invitation to interact or to communicate both ways hasn't always been like explicitly expressed. So parents probably are reading it or seeing it, or, at some point getting to it. But if you're not getting the response back, just don't give up, because it's just so important to keep that communication going. But if you send, yeah, go ahead.
No, and as you're saying that, it also reminds me of sometimes you'll get communication and you'll say, I'll get to that. And then there's this deadline that makes it difficult for me to get to that particular, like, oh, I missed that because I got all of these other things and I didn't get to this particular one. And if that's the case, if there's something that is time sensitive, allowing for a lot of time for families to do that. Not like we need it Friday and then I can only read it on Friday. I know our school used to send out folders where it has all the kids' work in it and notifications. We used to send it out every Tuesday, and then started to wonder why we weren't getting them back, or we weren't getting things signed, and realized we weren't giving families enough time to look at everything. Like, you get it Tuesday and you give it back Wednesday, and we started doing it Friday. And so that they had the weekend to look at it and not just Tuesday. And then I had to really quickly sign everything and send it all back. Those kinds of things. Like, sometimes a small shift in something like that allows for more families to engage.
Yeah, that's so important. And then another question that came through is, how often should teachers conduct parent-teacher meetings? And you and I were talking about this earlier too, and it's, yes, we should be meeting as educators. We should be meeting with parents. And I know some districts will say that, you have to meet with them once. But again, we were talking about how sometimes the only meetings taking place are when there's a problem, versus that building relationship type of meetings that can be really, really powerful. So I would answer that question by saying, as often as you need them.
Right. And specifically, I feel like I did this where you'd meet with a family and you would say something like at the end, and if you have any other questions, or, feel free to reach out, because, definitely I want you to reach out, but then not making the space for that to happen. Because then I'm not going to reach out. I may want to, but then I'm waiting till the next meeting time that I'm allowed to reach out. And for some families, that's for real. Like, when is the next time that I'm allowed to reach out if I do have something I want to reach out about? And being able to reconnect, especially when it's coming from the classroom teacher, and there's nothing wrong with it coming from the building administrator, but when it comes from the classroom teacher, it's like, oh, because I can really then reach out. It's not just this blanket, reach out to your child's teacher if you have a concern, but I'm telling you to reach out to me, and here are all the possible times that you can do this, and the possible ways that you can do this, and let me know what works for you. It can be, especially now, it doesn't have to be a come into the school building and sit down for 20, 30 minutes to meet with me, but there are many ways to connect, to meet, and have conferences with families now.
Yeah, and I think it's also, being proactive. So just like you would look at your class of, 27 fourth graders in front of you, and there's a handful of them that you need to check in with often and all day long, just to make sure they're on track, that they're focused, and so you may get the sense that there are some parents that, if you're proactive in checking in with them, you won't always hear from them by the time a problem has escalated to the point where everyone's really frustrated. So, just like you would apply that to students, you can check in with parents, and, it could be coming from fear, or, they're just worried, or they're so concerned about their child. But if you just have a check-in every couple of weeks, how's it going at home? Here's what I see in school. Sometimes that's just enough to make everyone feel a little more relaxed and a little more centered, so they don't have to wait until it's a huge problem to come to you with it.
When you say that, Kristen, that's really powerful, and that can help cut back on some of those really tricky conversations or conferences we have with families, because in most cases, because you're seeing them all day for 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, you can see when there's a child who is getting something and a child who may need a little bit more support. It is really challenging for a family to get news that their child is not doing well in something that they could have found out about earlier.
Mhm, mhm.
That's really tricky. And I know as a parent, I've been there where I'm just like, but you knew this was happening. So why didn't you let me know? Then
Yeah, yeah.
I could have supported you in supporting her with that, or I could have supported her more with this particular, in my mind, I'm like, okay, that must be going well. I feel like it's a little, prickly here, but I haven't heard anything. And then when you do, it's like, but why did we wait? Because every family wants their child to be successful. And so when it's the feeling like, wait, now they're not going to be, it's a lot harder to navigate a conference like that when we're not proactive in seeing, oh, this may be just one assessment, but this was a big assessment.
Mhm.
Let me chat with this family and let them know, here are the other things that are coming, but I just want you to know. So it's
Mhm.
not a surprise when you're
Yeah,
done.
exactly. Or it's you're meeting and talking about 10 things when you could really just, had started to lay the groundwork for that, much sooner. So
Yes.
it's, yeah, I think it's like, you know, thinking about best practices and how we work with our students and applying those to the adults that are part of the community that make up the students' lives. So,
Right.
but I really appreciate talking with you, Jane.